Hello, everyone. Once again, I'm joined with a fascinating founder of one of the companies I've been fortunate enough to invest in. Um, it's Robbie Allen from Bionic Health. Before we get started, just a quick reminder: this is not an offer to buy or sell securities in anything. Um, that's only available pursuant to offerings that could be made by Robbie or myself, but this is not anything of that type. It's just going to be a general conversation about what's going on at Bionic Health and how Robbie got here. And with that, Robbie, welcome.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate you having me on.
So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what you're doing at Bionic?
Yeah, so we started, in January of 2023, really with the idea that there's been a lot of innovation that's happened around preventative care in the last dozen or so years. Everything from new diagnostics and testing that's also kind of come down in price to new research. And even we're thinking it's a fair amount of interest in the space from the general public. There's people like Peter Attia, Andrew Huberman, that's really made a name for themselves in the longevity space. And one of the challenges is that it's still fairly early, and there's not a lot of good solutions out there to help people really understand what are the things that they can do to help them live healthier for longer. And this isn't about trying to extend life to 120, 150, anything like that, but it's about doing the things, as soon as you can so that you can be healthier for as long as you can. And so me and my co-founder thought this was a significant opportunity. And so we got really excited by it because we've sort of been closet DIY health junkies. My co-founder is a ER doctor, so it kind of comes natural to him. But this is something that we had gotten increasingly interested in the space, again, without there being a lot of good solutions in it. But the other kind of side of that is that the challenge with building a business like this is that it's very physician intensive. That is, in order to really deliver preventative care, you have to have doctors involved. And that's why you don't see a lot of businesses do this. And so how are we going to make this work for us? And the answer really is automation. So while my co-founder is an ER doctor by training, my background is in AI and machine learning. I started a couple of previous AI-based companies, including a company called Automated Insights back in 2010, which was one of the first generative AI companies that really started with a commercial orientation. And so we thought that the right way to go after this opportunity is delivering preventative care, but then automating a lot of what happens on the back end that doctors typically do. So really, those are kind of the two aspects of what we're building is a preventative healthcare solution that sits outside of traditional healthcare. It's not necessarily tied to your primary care visits and sick care. This is more about helping you, prevent things from happening in the future. And then on the back end, we're using, all of the latest AI techniques to help automate a lot of the doctor analysis that goes into figuring out, giving your blood work, here's the diagnosis, here's the treatment plan. And then we use our human doctors to validate that and verify that before we send it on to our members.
Great. As someone who's starting to get up there in age, I should probably start thinking about some of this. I've noticed that doctors tend to fall into two camps. One, that you really don't want to listen to what they do to their bodies because they're not the health. They're spending a little too much time in the office and not doing well. And others, like your partner, that have really recognized, and you've got a lot of information available to you. Might as well put it to use. But you said, we had this conversation back in January when we first met, but for a lot of people to hear that someone started an artificial intelligence company several years ago, is somewhat surprising, because it really just kind of jumped into the mainstream in November, December last year. And talk a little bit about the artificial intelligence world back in the unenlightened days.
Yeah, so the original company I started back in 2010, I mean, I started it really in 2007, but then I raised our first round of funding in 2010. It was called Automated Insights. And, to kind of briefly describe the origin story there, I'm a big sports fan. I had a blog at the time where I'd write up recaps of my favorite basketball team after every game. And I found that it was fairly formulaic. After you've written a bunch of recaps, it's mostly just analyzing numbers and describing them. And I thought, being a software person by training, there's got to be a way to automate that. And so that really kind of sent me down this path of figuring out how to take data and create narrative out of the data automatically. And so that's what Automated Insights became. We were generating, billions of pieces of content, 2011 and 12. And so, we got a lot of press at the time. It was a lot of these stories would come out and they'd have like a robot holding a pen or something like that. That was kind of the common meme that they would use when they were talking about stories like ours. But, we were really kind of doing some interesting work. We did fantasy football recaps for Yahoo and the NFL. We did automating earnings reports for the Associated Press. We did analyze TV ratings data for NBC. It was just a bunch of different kind of use cases, anywhere where you had data and you were trying to describe it. And so now if you fast forward to where we're at with Bionic Health, it's really not that much different. Now the underlying technology is completely different. Obviously things have come a huge way since then, but fundamentally what we're trying to do is take all this personal health data that we can now collect and describe it in a way similar to how a doctor would.
I recently read a book, I think a little bit about it, talking about using AI in medical practices. And some of the issues that are out there and potential fears of people just trying to diagnose themselves. I'm guilty of it. Instead of using a personal trainer, I just typed into ChatGPT, hey, I'm this age, I weigh this much, I got 45 minutes, what should I do? I don't think I want to do that with anything more important to my health, but what are some of the things that you're worried about and potentially could go wrong with AI?
I'm worried about, along the lines of what you're talking about, but when people are trying to apply it to more important information, right? So it's, you could even take your maybe a recent blood lab work that you had done and paste that into ChatGPT and ask for its opinion on things. First to note, the data is not secured to you necessarily. It's not a HIPAA compliant environment, so that data is not necessarily secured in maybe the manner that you'd like it. But it's also, there's more to it than that. What GPT is doing in general is essentially giving you the average response. That it's computed across all of the data that it's collected over time, which in some cases could be the right answer for you. In other cases, that may not. And so for us, we're still at a point now where having humans in the loop to help guide the diagnosis and treatment is still really important, right? Hallucinations are still a thing when it comes to these large language models. They don't necessarily have the right guardrails in place to make sure that they're delivering the right answers for you. And also, again, one of the biggest problems is that with these generic large language models is they're trained on the entire internet worth of data. They're not trained on just medical, or they're not kind of fine-tuned to specifically healthcare use cases. And so that means you actually aren't getting the best answer necessarily. You may still be getting a pretty good answer, and in some cases even a answer that's comparable to what you might get out of a doctor, but not always. And so it's risky for sure. Much in the way that it was risky asking Dr. Google for your answers to those questions prior to ChatGPT. And so that's where we think Bionic really provides value, is that we're leveraging LLMs too. That's a big aspect of our technology stack. But we have doctors that review everything that comes out. We also have doctors that, the prompt that you provide may not be the best prompt to get the answer that you need. Because, you're not a healthcare person. You don't, combination of things. You're not a healthcare person, and you're not a healthcare person that's very experienced with crafting prompts for LLMs to get the best responses out. And we found both of those are super important. And that's what Bionic is bringing to the table, is that we're using all of our physician knowledge and our understanding of AI to create an infrastructure that allows us to take advantage of that capability, but then while still making sure that we have the proper oversight on top of it.
And that there's also individual issues, like, if I'm putting in the prompt, I may forget that I had back surgery 6 years ago, or things that my doctor knows that should be part of any decision. As they say, if you're going to start exercising or start a diet, you should probably consult your physician before you do it. And I don't think that certainly ChatGPT is not going to know all of the individual issues of a person that's putting it in.
Yeah, and that's the other big value, I think, in the future. In fact, I meet with a lot of entrepreneurs. We're based in Durham, North Carolina. We have a pretty vibrant startup community, and a lot of entrepreneurs are trying to figure out, how do I leverage LLMs? And one of the key values that I see companies being able to add, especially right now, is that we like to think that LLMs can answer any question. And that is true to a certain extent, with the caveats that we've already been talking about, but there's still plenty of green space to help facilitate, organizing a lot of information, tracking it over time, and providing that into an LLM so that you can give a better answer over a period of time. And that's absolutely the case when it comes to healthcare. So one of the things that we do is we have a fairly extensive onboarding process for our members. We collect a bunch of data. That becomes part of this knowledge repository that we have on each of our members. We then have our members go out and get a lot of lab work done. That's another thing we store. They can upload previous lab work. Essentially all the data. And that's why we also kind of picked preventative care as a place we wanted to focus, is because unlike a lot of areas of medicine, preventative is an area that it's data hungry. That is, we'll take all the data you got, because like if you're trying to help somebody, understand their biology and prevent, future disease and sickness, there's no data that's not helpful, right? To use a double negative. We want to take all the data we can, which is again a benefit of machine learning. But the problem is, most people don't have ready access to that. That's a process of collecting it over time. And we're a repository for that information for our members. And then that then makes us even more valuable moving forward, because if somebody could ask a question and you go and say, okay, I'm not worked out, I'm ready to work out. And we already have the background information about your back surgery. We know that, what your weight is and what your activity patterns are and all of these things.
We tend to not share my weight.
I didn't know I said 140 pounds. I'm sorry.
I did weigh that once. It was a while ago. But so where are you from?
Yeah, so I currently reside in Durham, North Carolina. I was born in Burlington, North Carolina, which isn't too far from Durham. Moved around a fair amount. I lived in the Bay Area during the .com boom and bust. I worked at Cisco for 13 years. While I was there, while I lived in the Bay Area, which was a phenomenal time. It was sleeping under my desk 3 to 4 nights a week. It was just kind of interesting to see all these companies grow up during that period. I left Cisco as a distinguished engineer, which was their top technical position. But by that point, I was ready to start something new, do something different. And so that's when I started my first company.
Okay. And when you started with Burlington and Durham and moved around quite a bit, it reminded me of a friend I had in Boston that they once got outside of 128. But they claimed they moved around a lot. And you were sleeping under your desk not because you couldn't afford another place, I assume.
No, so the rationale, and again, I was like 20, 21 years old. Initially an intern out of college, and then Cisco this was 1997 to date myself, but Cisco told me that this thing called the .com boom was happening, and they didn't care that I didn't have my degree. I was computer science at the time. They needed as many programmers as they could hire, and so they said, finish your degree in your spare time and move out to San Jose, California. And so I did that, and so again, it was this sort of crazy mentality back then where I lived in South San Jose. My commute was maybe 45 minutes each way, and I would think, okay, so it's 9 p.m. because my day would go that long, and like I could either keep working, work up until like 11 or 12 o'clock, sleep under my desk, get up at 6, and like waste no time, or I could drive and waste 45 minutes on the way home, and then another 45 minutes, and I've lost an hour and a half of potential productivity just in driving. Why not just sleep under my desk and I can gain all that back? And so, that was sort of the mentality back then.
Yeah, it was about that time I was made president of an operating unit for a company I was working for, and it was 100 people, and 85 of them were effectively programmers. And the office was set up in such a way that they could live there. And it took me a little while to realize that programming is something that comes in. Some days you just don't have it, and other days you have it, and you have it for a week, and you just sit there and get it done. And the people who are good at it, they don't want to leave. So it sounds like you had a little bit of that in you.
Yeah, no, it was definitely the case, especially you get early in my career, I was still soaking it all in, and like I said, the environment, the .com boom was such a fascinating time. Although I remember when the crash happened, and then I drive to work one day, it's like, wow, it used to be really bad traffic, but now the traffic's not so bad anymore. What happened? It's like, well, a lot of people got laid off, and so there was sort of a flip side to that whole thing.
Yeah, but definitely an exciting time to be out there. I visited quite often, but I wasn't never full-time part of that environment. So you said that you started your first company because of a fascination with sports. So you still have that?
Yeah, I'm a big UNC Tar Heel fan. So I, not as much on the professional side, but I follow just about any UNC sport. We are now into basketball season officially here in October. We're not in football season anymore.
Yeah. I've heard they've got a good women's soccer team.
They do, very good.
Yeah. As the Duke grad, I can't talk about that other sport with you. Are you still doing kind of on the side blogging, or just enjoying sports?
Yeah, I don't do as much blogging these days. In many ways, I started my first company because I had all these questions about UNC basketball. Like, it sure seems like we have more opponents that have like a career night against us than what other teams experience. And so, like, once I was able to collect all the data, I could go in and answer those questions. Or it's like, we tend to have high variability in 3-point percentage. And so I had these things, or like which teams are most overrated. And so I would come up with all these different metrics. For example, how do you determine if a team's overrated? Well, you could look at their preseason top 25 ranking and their postseason results. And so, I could answer the question. Yeah, UNC tends to be a little bit overrated. There's some other teams I won't mention, Greg, that tend to be even more overrated.
Oh yeah, I would imagine.
But I'm glad I run that analysis recently because, considering USC didn't even make the tournament last year, our rating in that regard, I'm sure is not good.
I think you were referring to Notre Dame football.
Yes, that's what.
Did you ever take that into the gambling world? Because I think that when you do that analysis, you'll find that point spreads tend to be a little askew because of teams like that.
Yeah, that was the constant pull for us, was to get into gambling. We didn't at the time, and again, gambling wasn't even legalized during that time period.
Well, it was in Las Vegas.
Well, except Las Vegas, sure. But like, we were based in North Carolina, so we literally probably would have needed to move to Las Vegas to make that work. But no, we didn't go down that path.
So let's talk a little bit about your team. What do you look for? How excited are you with the people you've been able to bring in?
Well, it starts with my co-founder. So Dr. Jared Pello, he was an ER doctor, as I mentioned, and then he started a company called iScribes back in 2014, 2015. And it was one of the early virtual scribing services. So, he was actually using Pebble watches, if you remember those. And he would give them to doctors to record doctor-patient interaction. And then you have somebody on the back end transcribe those recordings into a doctor's note. And he brought me on as their independent board member a few years in, because he developed this, fairly large collection of recordings and doctor's notes. And the question was, could we use machine learning to take a recording coming in and automatically create the doctor's note without having to have a person do it? So anyway, we started working on that, but then the company was acquired by Nuance Communications. And then shortly after that, Microsoft acquired Nuance. And so Jared had been at Microsoft and was working with Microsoft Research. That's why he got early access to GPT-4, way before it came out to the public. But it all kind of starts with him. I don't have a healthcare background in terms of the industry. And so if I was going to get into the space, I needed somebody that had that. And so, as I like to say, he's the brains of the operation. So it all kind of started with him. And since then, we created a policy in the company that, at least for as long as we can, we were only going to hire people that we'd worked with before, or people that, maybe we worked with in a contracting basis, because we really wanted to have a solid team. And, I have to say that strategy's worked out brilliantly. I mean, I'd love to continue it forever. We won't be able to do that indefinitely, but certainly working with people that were known quantities to us has paid tremendous dividends.
And it's nice to not have to teach the culture.
Yeah. And it's not, there's this period anytime you hire someone, like, where you're just trying, because everyone knows that the interview process is fraught with all sorts of issues, and you don't really know what you're getting. And that goes for both sides, right? And so you're still kind of a month in trying to assess, each other. Versus if you worked with that person, maybe you worked with them for several years, like, going in what you're getting, and they know what they're getting. And so it just cuts a lot of corners, and that's been great.
Yeah. When I did my startup, I rated the company with all of the engineers that I had been working with them, and it is a great way to do it. Part of my team is made up of people that interned for us and then went away, and we came back and we hired them, because it's nice to not have to go through all of that. I think it gives you a heads up. But it was interesting you said that doctors the brains of the operation. I thought that was the AI.
Good point. Well, it's funny because when I started, and I probably even mentioned this to you, Greg, that like my goal is to automate my co-founder, right? And so like our whole mission is to automate Jared as much as possible. And some people say, well, I mean, is Jared offended by that? Like, does he really want to be automated? And he's the first to say, absolutely, because as soon as we can automate him, like he can just go sit on a beach somewhere. And so he's totally cool with that whole concept. But yeah, we've kind of been in lockstep with that mission from the very beginning, and we work. We're a great complement because, again, he's got all the healthcare experience, I have all the software experience, and so it's really worked out well.
Although, just to clear things up, there's been a lot of people panicked about AI and making people unnecessary, and then go sit on the beach. as you described in great detail earlier, and in other conversations we've had, Bionic Health, it's important that there's actually an individual looking at what you're doing. And I think that AI is really, and most of the tools that are being developed are really just creating an assistant for you, as opposed to automating the actual person and making them go away.
Yeah, and that, I mean, it's a great, I bring it up because like the point of it is, Jared, he's totally on board with the notion that we're going to automate a doctor as much as we possibly can, knowing that, this would be something we could work on the rest of our lives and never fully accomplish it. That said, I do think that it's hard to predict where things are at in 10 years beyond. Part of the challenge is regulatory, right? Like you have to have, even if I came to you and said, guess what, we have, and this is what I would caution people to be wary of. If somebody says that we've automated a doctor, and so now we don't even have to have a human in the loop, even if that was technically true, you can't do that, at least in the United States, unless the FDA approves it, right? Like you can't practice medicine without the FDA having approved that software. And they have a huge backlog now. There's a lot of things going in. In fact, we've had conversations with the FDA as well, and like they typically approve very niche specific things, right? The notion that they would even approve software that quote automated a doctor is just not even feasible anytime soon. So for us, we have to have a doctor in the loop. For now, it's 100% a necessity. In the future, I don't know if it'll be a necessity. Can we automate doctors? I do think for specific use cases and situations that certainly will be possible. I think there's another conversation we could have on, and I got this question all the way back in 2010 when people would say, okay, so you're automating these stories, you're automating journalists out of a job. How do you react to that? And in almost all cases over the last 15 years, most of the jobs that have been automated out of necessity, not because like some entrepreneur said, you know what, there's a great paying job that people love, let's go automate that. It's almost always there's a job that we can't get enough people to do, or people don't like doing at all, and we have to automate because there's no other options. And in fact, that's absolutely the case in healthcare. One of the biggest problems that we face is that we don't have enough physicians. And in fact, the problem's only getting worse. The World Health Organization estimates that half of the world's population doesn't have access to high quality healthcare. And so, you can make an argument that, those people could benefit from a robo-doctor today, even if it isn't perfect, because they're not getting access to high quality healthcare anyway. So I do think it's not a clear cut question of like, yes, let's make sure that we don't fully automate a doctor, or, those are only negative implications. Actually, I think while people think automating a doctor, gosh, if we do that, there's going to be so many people displaced. No, actually, we have to do it out of necessity. We don't have enough doctors today. In 10 years, the problem's only worse. So we have to go in this direction. The question is to what extent do we continue down that path? And to how much do we open it up to the people that really need it, that can't even get good healthcare today?
Well, it's good that we're going to still need doctors. My son's been out of college for 6 years and he just applied to med school. So I think I'm going to pay for that, and I'd like to have there be a job when he gets done.
I think he'll be good for a while.
Okay. Yeah.
But I do think the role of the doctor is going to change, as it will in many, professions. I mean, it'll be much more of a, there'll be co-pilots that are available to doctors, and the ones that don't, the ones I worry about the most aren't that, doctors are going to wake up and like they have no job. It's going to be the ones that wake up and say, well, you know what, I refused to embrace or work with technology. And I think they're the ones that are going to have more problems. And, one of my sort of favorite lines on this is, to fly a commercial airplane today, you have to use computer systems. Like you can't fly a commercial jet without the aid of computer systems. And I think the same will be true in healthcare, that eventually, we'll look back maybe even in 10 years and say, so you used to meet with a doctor and you just went strictly off of their knowledge. They didn't actually, have a co-pilot that helped them, Well, yeah, that's how it worked. And I think we'll find that to be not ideal.
Yeah. The improvement and just the throughput. I mean, we live in pretty good places, and if I want to go see the doctor for a physical, I can schedule it 6 months out. There just are not enough spots, and anything that we can do to make the process more adaptive to the number of doctors we have is great. So other than, wanting to automate yourself out of a job, it's kind of the company mantra here. What would you be doing if you weren't doing this?
Yeah, great question. I probably would be trying to finish my PhD. So after my first company got acquired.
You dropped out of college, undergrad. And then you dropped out of your PhD. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a trend here.
Yes, I know, but all for the sake of business, I guess.
Okay.
So maybe there's some rationale for that. But yeah, I started my PhD after my first company was acquired, and then I started another company, which made me pause my PhD. And so I kind of view that as my retirement, is to work on that and teach. I also did a decent amount of teaching.
What are you studying?
So the PhD is in machine learning and computer science.
Okay. Anything specific or?
Well, the focus area is machine learning. It was at UNC is where
Okay, that's great. What do you do for fun?
A lot of UNC. I have 2 kids, so they keep me pretty busy. But typically, it's related to sports of some kind, watching whatever sport is in season for UNC.
How old are the kids?
9 and 16.
All right. So are they into sports or?
My 9-year-old son, he's starting to get into sports. But, we'll see.
A little bit of everything.
Yeah, which I'm trying to encourage. This trend toward hyper specialization super early, I'm just not a big fan of. Like, I did 5 sports when I was in high school for a couple of years, and I still think it's best it's just too early. My daughter, 16 now, she did dance from as early as 4 years old, and she only ever did dance. And then by the time she got to high school, she was like, maybe I don't like dance, but now it's kind of too late to pick up any of the other sports. And so I think that's a bad, there's books that have been written on this, that it's best not to specialize too early. So I'm in favor of trying out a bunch of things.
I would think a former dancer would be able to pick up a lot of sports and excel in them pretty quickly, though.
I don't know. There's
the footwork's amazing.
The footwork's there, but it's the hand-eye that's probably the biggest issue. Whether it's softball or volleyball or any of those. Track. She considered track. That's probably the easiest. But any of the tennis. She started playing tennis and all that. But the hand-eye just has developed.
A lot of sports can use a defender that knows how to use their feet. So,
True.
Soccer.
Yep, soccer.
But it's the specialization is crazy. My kids unfortunately had their high school class had 1,100 people in each class. So if you wanted to actually play a sport for the high school, you pretty much had to specialize.
Yeah.
And,
well, and that's how it is now.
Which makes it work. I think you get a lot of repetitive use injuries, and the athletes ultimately become a lot less rounded.
Yeah, and there's all the travel teams. These sports have become year-round sports for every sports.
Yes.
In order to kind of keep up, you have to do that sport year-round.
And it sets some financial issues up for. It eliminates a lot of people who can't do that.
Yeah,
which is unfortunate. But it's certainly a different time. We played a lot of sports when I was growing up because you were sent out of the house and you were told to come home when the streetlights came on. You entertained yourself anyway.
Now, I sit out in the parking lot, waiting for an hour to pick up my kid from the practice room. It's funny.
Yeah. Well, at least you're not out trying to out coach the coach.
Yeah.
There's some of those parents. Well, anything else you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap this up?
No, so go to bionichealth.com. Currently, we're only accepting new members in the state of North Carolina. We have to have doctors that are licensed in the states that we're in, but in the second half of 2024, we're going to be opening up to more states. And so, sign up for our wait list or feel free to reach out. Happy to connect.
All right, great. How about someone who frequently visits North Carolina?
That might work.
Okay. I have a 96-year-old mother who doesn't have any meds.
Wow.
Which is a little scary for me because part of me thinks, oh, I'm fine.
Yeah, that's good.
I have good genes. I probably shouldn't count on that.
Genes are only 20 to 30%. So.
Yeah. Yeah. The diet probably offsets all of that 30%. So,
yes.
Well, Robbie, thank you very much for your time. It was great catching up with you, and look forward to watching Bionic continue to grow.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate you having me on.